one of the few places on Earth where practically every citizen is familiar with the sensation of an earthquake is Tokyo. They are exposed to it from an early age. For it, they drill. They anticipate it. Nevertheless, despite all of that familiarity, Tokyo faces a greater threat now than it did a century ago. 4 tectonic plates support the city. They are always in motion, creating pressure beneath an area that is home to around 40 million people. Any city would be at sufficient risk from that alone. However, Tokyo faces more difficulties than that. Volcanoes, typhoons, tsunamis, and earthquakes. It is not limited to a single kind of calamity. It confronts every one of them. Tokyo started this enormous $100 billion initiative to fortify the city from the ground up. A strategy intended to support Tokyo's continued operations during earthquakes, typhoons, blackouts, and even a Mount Fuji volcanic eruption. This is the Tokyo Resilience Project, one of the biggest urban safety initiatives in the world and one of the most ambitious that Japan has ever attempted. Tokyo's history must be examined in order to comprehend the motivation for this endeavor. The city has been repeatedly destroyed, sometimes by uncontrollably powerful forces, but each time it has been rebuilt with fresh insights. Tokyo's original name, Edo, experienced catastrophic earthquakes 3 centuries ago. A powerful earthquake that rocked the area in 1703 caused a tsunami in Edo Bay. Tens of thousands perished. Another significant earthquake occurred in 1855. Fires spread, wooden homes collapsed, and thousands more people perished. Modern engineering, coordinated response, and seismic standards were non-existent. Even so, the city began to adapt. Tiny increments, yet they displayed a pattern. Every calamity made the city reevaluate its design. In 1923, that pattern reached a breaking point. 11:58 a.m. Tokyo experienced the biggest earthquake in modern history on September 1, 1923. The measurement was 7.9 in size. However, it wasn't only the shaking, so the number doesn't adequately describe what transpired. It was the timing and subsequent events. Thousands of households and restaurants were cooking over open fires when the earthquake happened, right before lunch. Immediately, fires started, and as powerful winds fueled the flames, they grew out of control. Districts as a whole burned. Tornadoes of fire formed. Iron was melted in several places due to the extreme heat. Over 38,000 people who had sought refuge at a clothes depot in the Hanjo neighborhood were involved in the bloodiest incident, killed when a huge fire erupted. Over 100,000 individuals had perished by the time the fires finally subsided. Of those, about 70,000 were in Tokyo alone. More than 44% of the city's structures were damaged by fire or shaking. There was a declaration of martial law. One day after the earthquake, Prime Minister Yamamoto established a restoration bureau, and troops were dispatched to restore order. Cleanup wasn't the only priority. It focused on reconstructing while keeping safety in mind. Shimp Gudo and other urban designers envisioned a rebuilt Tokyo with open parks that might function as emergency shelters, broad boulevards that could act as fire breaks, and a stricter building code to prevent collapse. The idea wasn't carried out in its entirety. However, the city continued to make significant adjustments. In order to prevent future fires, roads like Shodori and Adidori were cut through communities that had been burnt. Parks such as Hamacho and Sumida were developed especially as construction techniques and catastrophe refuge places started to change. Reinforced concrete was the most significant modification. Tokyo was a wooded city before 1923. Projects like the Dojinkai Apartments, Japan's first mass-produced concrete apartment buildings, were supported by the government following the earthquake. Compared to conventional dwellings, they were far more resilient to shaking, small and fireproof. This was Tokyo's first significant step toward earthquake-resistant building, and it wouldn't be the last. The catastrophe had a profound effect. It also established a mood. The city would do more than simply reconstruct what it had lost. It was going to rebuild more intelligently. Because of the 1923 earthquake, Japan observes Disaster Prevention Day on September 1st each year as a national reminder of what went wrong and what needs to be done to avoid it from happening again. Tokyo wasn't done learning either despite those lessons. Then Kobe was struck by the massive Hanshin earthquake in 1995. The country was outraged by the pictures. Highways fell apart, blocks fell apart, over 64,000 people died, and Tokyo could not disregard the lesson. The repercussions would be substantially worse if this occurred here. Tokyo entered a new phase of planning after one more occurrence that was more significant than any previous one. A magnitude 9 earthquake, one of the biggest ever recorded, struck Japan on March 11, 2011. Nothing happened off the coast of Tohoku. Tokyo was more than 350 kilometers from the epicenter. However, the capital's trembling persisted for longer than 2 minutes. Alarms went off. Office furniture rolled across floors, buildings shook like ships at sea, and millions of people fled into the streets. The engineering in Tokyo performed precisely as intended. The movement was absorbed and flexed by tall buildings. Bridges remained in place. Subways did not sustain structural damage. It was significantly different from the Great Kanto earthquake in 1923, when fires destroyed more than 40% of Tokyo. The kind of collapse that once reduced entire districts to rubble was avoided by modern building standards. However, Tokyo has not yet been hit by the true catastrophe. The same earthquake caused a record-breaking tsunami along the northeastern shore. Towns were completely submerged when the flood surged more than 40 meters high in some places. In a matter of seconds, entire neighborhoods disappeared. Everything was dragged inland and then back out to sea, including cars, houses, and schools. There were around 20,000 fatalities or disappearances. Then the third catastrophe struck. The Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant was inundated by tsunami water, which destroyed cooling and power systems. A number of reactors melted, the worst nuclear crisis since Chernobyl confronted the nation. All of a sudden, Japan was battling 3 crises at once: a nuclear crisis, a tsunami, and an earthquake. Tokyo was quickly affected, even though none of this occurred within the city. Rolling blackouts spread throughout the city as energy production declined. Millions of people were left stranded as trains were stopped for safety inspections. An influx of calls caused phone networks to collapse. Roads, ports, and distribution hubs in the northeast were damaged, causing supply lines to freeze. The magnitude of the catastrophe was not the only factor that made this moment so crucial. It was the understanding that Tokyo might be immobilized without being struck directly. A distinct pattern emerges when you contrast these 3 significant occurrences. Tokyo witnessed what happens when a city burns down in 1923. 1995 demonstrated the consequences of building failure. 2011 demonstrated the consequences of system failure. Tokyo learned something new after every catastrophe. Additionally, each new lesson contributed to the Tokyo Resilience Project's basis. Tokyo realized that a single incident might not be the only cause of the future catastrophe. There might be multiple at once: a blackout during a pandemic, a flood during a heat wave, or an earthquake during a typhoon. Luck was not an option for the city. It had to get ready for everything. Tokyo's most ambitious plan to date was the result of this kind of thinking. A multi-decade endeavor to get the capital ready for the coming century. Not one catastrophe at a time, but all of them at once. The Tokyo Resilience Project, which is supported by 17 trillion yen, was introduced in December 2022 and is the most extensive safety plan in Tokyo's history. That amounts to about $109 billion. The objective is straightforward and spans 2 decades. Defend Tokyo against the most possible calamities and maintain the city's operations in the face of each one. However, it goes beyond earthquakes. 5 main threat categories are covered under the plan: contagious diseases, power and communication disruptions, volcanic activity, wind and flood damage, and earthquakes. The goal is to keep the city going throughout the next crisis, not only to survive it. Tokyo's planning documents contain a phrase that is crucial to the project. Even in the worst-case situation, a city should not burn down or collapse, and its residents should live. It's a list. Buildings must first continue to stand. Second, we cannot permit fires to spread as they did in 1923. Third, safeguards must be in place to keep people safe, not only during the incident, but also in the hours and days that follow. This covers access to power and transportation, food, water, housing, medical attention, and communication. In order to prevent the city from shutting down entirely following a significant catastrophe, it also entails companies and schools having well-defined continuity plans. Furthermore, this is not solely a government initiative. Wards, private businesses, utilities, tech companies, emergency services, and people are all involved in the project, which is being managed by the Tokyo metropolitan government. Tokyo was also among the first cities in the world to issue resilience bonds, a financial instrument that attracts investors who are particularly concerned with long-term safety and climate security in order to finance disaster adaptation. Additionally, the project's timing is not arbitrary. It was declared nearly a century after the Great Kanto earthquake of 1923. These days, Tokyo has some of the world's most stringent seismic building regulations. Buildings constructed after 1981, and particularly after 2000, are intended to flex and absorb energy rather than fight it. Skyscrapers wobble. Sheer walls and steel bracing are used to strengthen low-rise structures. And vital establishments, such as government offices and hospitals, employ base isolation technologies that allow the entire structure to hover only over the trembling ground. However, the project is not limited to new construction. It's as necessary to retrofit older ones. 10 years ago, only about 81% of Tokyo's homes met earthquake-resistant standards. Today, almost 92% of them do. Outreach, subsidies, and occasionally mandates are the sources of this improvement. Financial assistance is available to property owners for rebuilding or retrofitting. Public housing complexes, schools, and even temples are being strengthened. Then there's fire. The majority of deaths in 1923 were caused by fires. Tokyo is still aware of that. These days, entire wooden home neighborhoods have been targeted for renovation. The streets are now wider. Fireproof zones have been created around the city, and fire-resistant building materials are being employed. Areas where evacuation routes must remain available and building density must be decreased. In addition to improving the city's aesthetics, power lines are being buried to shield the grid from wind damage, falling trees, and collapsing poles during earthquakes or storms. The early warning system is another. Japan's National Seismic Early Warning System includes Tokyo. The initial tremors of an earthquake are detected by more than 2,000 sensors. Real-time alerts are transmitted to smartphones, broadcast on radio and television, and relayed to elevators, trains, and industrial facilities. Tokyo residents may receive a warning 5, 10, or even 30 seconds prior to the onset of the worst shaking. That's enough time to close a gas valve, stop a train, or get under a table. However, the largest engineering component is located beneath. Tokyo is constructing one of the biggest networks of reservoirs and flood control tunnels in the world. The most well-known is the Metropolitan Area Outer Underground Discharge Channel, a 5-story deep tunnel system with sequoia-sized pillars. During typhoons or strong storms, it is responsible for collecting and rerouting extra rainwater from rivers and sewers. And it's expanding. This system is being greatly expanded by the Resilience Project, which will add kilometers of additional drainage tunnels and connect several subterranean tanks. When combined, they are intended to stop surface flooding in places that were often flooded only a few decades ago. Levees. Seawalls and floodgates near rivers and Tokyo Bay's edge are also being upgraded in Tokyo. These are mechanized in addition to being reinforced. The gates automatically close to prevent a surge if water levels increase too quickly. All things considered, this city is not waiting for the worst to play out. It's preparation. Additionally, communication networks are being strengthened. The battery life of cell towers has increased. In the event that regular networks fail, emergency satellite links can be activated. To facilitate communication, public Wi-Fi networks might enter disaster mode. The city is ensuring that mobile warnings don't go silent when they're most needed because millions of people depend on them. Tokyo's transportation system, which is arguably its most important one, is receiving more support. Although trains are already automatically stopped by seismic sensors, station entrances are being raised and tunnels are being reinforced to prevent floods. Steel jacketing and flexible support systems have been added to elevated highways. Following a tragedy, the city has established emergency transportation routes that must promptly reopen. Additionally, the project gets ready for less evident dangers. Although inert, Mount Fuji is still alive. Airports, ventilation systems, and road visibility might all be affected if ash from an eruption swept toward Tokyo. Road clearance equipment, air filtration shelters, and ash removal are being planned in Tokyo. Another layer was introduced by the COVID-19 experience: simultaneous disasters. Tokyo redesigned evacuation centers to provide for ventilation and room. Hospitals expanded their capability for surges. To deal with compound problems, the city accumulated medical supplies, masks, and sanitary equipment. However, no matter how sophisticated the engineering becomes, it cannot function without skilled workers. Tokyo has developed a culture of readiness. Drills are routinely practiced by students. Volunteers are trained as first responders by their communities. Businesses provide their staff with food and drink. Emergency kits are kept by families. Tokyo hosts one of the biggest disaster drills in the world on September 1st each year. The entire city practices. Sirens sound, notifications are sent out, and evacuation routes are tested. This ongoing repetition creates something that technology cannot do on its own: assurance. People are aware of who to listen to, where to go, and how to assist others. Tokyo's strategy is currently having an impact on cities all around the world. The rest of the world has been influenced by its earthquake engineering. One expectation is the basis of Tokyo's strategy. There will be a catastrophic event, not in the lifespan of the majority of people, not someday, not in theory. The greater Tokyo area has a 70% chance of experiencing a magnitude 7 earthquake in the next 30 years, according to government estimates. The city does not depend on chance because of this likelihood. It depends on engineering, preparedness, as well as long-term planning. This is the point at which I return to you. What about the city you live in if Tokyo, with its size, density, and risk, is able to implement these measures? Does your structure adhere to safety regulations? Are you aware of the location of the closest evacuation center? Tokyo is making every effort to safeguard itself for the next 100 years. How ready are the rest of us now? Please share your opinions in the comments section below.